3 days ago, a man walked away from a negotiating table in Islamabad, and that single act may have just lit the fuse on the most dangerous internal collapse the Middle East has seen in a generation. The man's name is Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. He was Iran's most powerful civilian official. He was the bridge between the guns and the diplomats, and he didn't leave because he wanted to. He was pushed by his own people, by the men in uniform who now control every lever of power inside the Islamic Republic and who have decided, quietly and deliberately, that peace is more dangerous to them than total economic ruin. Right now, as you watch this, Iranian oil wells are days away from being forced into shutdown. The Strait of Hormuz is being used as a weapon against countries that aren't even involved in this war. The president of Iran cannot get a meeting with the supreme leader. And a man who sits on Interpol's red notice list for an alleged terrorist bombing in Buenos Aires is, in all practical terms, running a country of 92 million people with the world's third largest oil reserves and an active nuclear program. This is not a story about a ceasefire or a negotiation. This is a story about a regime devouring itself. And what happens in the next 30 days will reshape the price of oil, the stability of the Gulf, and the balance of power across the entire Middle East. Let me take you inside what actually happened, because the speed of this collapse has been almost impossible to follow in real time. On April 7th, the United States and Iran agreed to a 2-week ceasefire after nearly 2 months of intense fighting. Iranian Foreign Minister IRGC announced publicly that the Strait of Hormuz was open. Shipping companies across Asia began routing vessels back through the strait. And in Islamabad, Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Asim Munir mediated 21 hours of talks aimed at producing a unified Iranian counterproposal that could form the basis of a longer deal. The deadline came. Nothing was submitted. And on the very same day, IRGC declared the strait open. IRGC naval units opened fire on commercial vessels passing through it. Iranian state television called IRGC a fool, live on air, in front of the entire country. And then, within hours, the news broke that Ghalibaf had stepped away from the negotiating team entirely. The signal was not subtle. The men with the guns were not interested in a deal. They were not interested in the foreign minister's announcements. They were not interested in the ceasefire. And they were absolutely not interested in what the parliament speaker had been quietly building in Islamabad. Now, you have to understand who Ghalibaf actually is, because this is not some faceless bureaucrat being shuffled out of a committee. Ghalibaf commanded the Basij's Imam Reza Brigade during the Iran-Iraq War. He commanded the 5th Nasser Division. He ran Khatam al-Anbiya, the IRGC's massive construction and economic empire. He served as Tehran's mayor for over a decade. He ran for president 4 times. He was, by any serious measure, one of the 3 most powerful men in Iran during this war. He was not a moderate in the Western sense of that word. He was a former IRGC general himself, a man who spoke the language of the Revolutionary Guards and could still pick up a phone and get an answer from their headquarters. He was the bridge. And the bridge has now been burned, not by Washington, not by Tel Aviv, but by the IRGC itself, which decided that even one of their own former commanders had become too dangerous to keep at the table. The official Iranian response made things worse, not better. Authorities denied everything, calling reports of Ghalibaf's resignation baseless. And then, within minutes of that denial, Ghalibaf himself, President Pezeshkian, and Foreign Minister IRGC all posted nearly identical messages on their social media accounts, word for word, declaring there were no moderates or radicals in Iran, only Iranians and revolutionaries united under the Supreme Leader. 3 of the most powerful men in Iran publishing the exact same sentence at the exact same time. That is not coordination. That is dictation. Someone wrote that script and handed it to all 3 of them. And the only entity in the Islamic Republic with the authority to dictate simultaneously to the president, the foreign minister, and the parliament speaker is the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The denial proved the resignation. The unified message proved the divided regime. The statement itself confirmed that Iran's civilian leadership no longer controls its own voice. So, who is actually running Iran? The first name that matters is Ahmad Vahidi, the IRGC commander-in-chief appointed in March of this year as the war was escalating. Vahidi commanded the Quds Force in the 1990s before Qasem Soleimani took over. He is on Interpol's red notice list for his alleged involvement in the 1994 Emieh bombing in Buenos Aires that killed 85 people. The second name is Mohammad Bakr Zolkadr, the Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, an old IRGC hand who reportedly cannot even coordinate effectively between the various power centers inside the regime. And then there is Mojtaba Khamenei, the new Supreme Leader, whose health and whereabouts have become genuinely uncertain, and who, according to informed sources inside Tehran, is being kept in the dark by a military council of senior IRGC commanders who have effectively built a security cordon around him, controlling what information he receives and what decisions reach his desk. The Supreme Leader of Iran, the man whose word is supposed to be law, is reportedly being managed and isolated by his own military. The question everyone is asking is why? Why would any rational actor sabotage its own diplomacy in the middle of a war it is losing economically? The answer becomes obvious once you understand what the IRGC actually is. It is not just a military force. Through its construction conglomerate Khatam al-Anbiya, it controls major portions of Iranian construction, oil services, telecommunications, petrochemicals, and banking. Through its proxy networks, it funds and directs Hezbollah, the Houthis, and militias across Iraq and Syria. Through its intelligence wing, it manages domestic surveillance and political enforcement. The IRGC, over the past 2 decades, has quietly colonized every institution of the Iranian state. And if peace comes, that empire is questioned. Budgets get cut. Economic monopolies face scrutiny. Proxy networks lose their justification. And civilians start asking why an organization consuming that much of the national budget is even necessary in peacetime. War removes all of those questions. War is the IRGC's business model, its political cover, and its institutional survival strategy rolled into one. This is why every time a moderate Iranian official has gotten within reach of a deal in the past 25 years, something has happened to destroy it. The pattern is not accidental. It is structural. Look at what the IRGC has done in just 3 weeks. They reimposed the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz after Aragchi announced it was open. They struck Indian commercial vessels in the strait. They forced Ghalibaf off the negotiating table and are now reportedly considering replacing him with Saeed Jalili, one of the most hard-line figures in the entire Iranian political system, a man who served as chief nuclear negotiator from 2007 to 2013, a period during which Iran's nuclear program advanced rapidly while talks produced nothing. If Jalili takes the chair, the message to Washington is explicit. We are stalling, we are buying time, and we are using your patience against you. Meanwhile, the economic situation inside Iran has moved from crisis to catastrophe. The IMF estimates the Iranian economy will contract by more than 6% in 2026, with inflation approaching 70%. The rial has collapsed to around 1.3 million per dollar. The middle class has been effectively erased. And the U.S. naval blockade is now strangling the country's main economic corridors. Storage facilities on Karg Island, Iran's main oil export terminal, are filling faster than the country can sell oil. The U.S. Treasury has warned publicly that Iran is days away from being forced to shut in its own oil wells. When that happens, restarting them costs billions of dollars and permanently destroys 5 to 10% of productive capacity. Iran would be physically dismantling its own energy future just to survive the next few weeks. Senior Iranian economic officials have reportedly warned President Pezeshkian that it could take more than a decade to rebuild the economy. The central bank governor is urging him to pursue peace immediately, but Pezeshkian cannot even secure a meeting with the Supreme Leader. The man constitutionally responsible for executive decisions is locked out of the room where decisions are made. The economic warning falls into a void. And what the Trump administration understands, what they have been betting on since they extended the ceasefire while simultaneously tightening the blockade, is that this void is the strategy, not bombing, not escalation. Sitting back and turning up the heat on an economy that is already on fire, while allowing the IRGC's internal power grab to accelerate the contradictions that are already tearing the regime apart. Iran is losing an estimated $500 million a day. The Trump administration is now threatening Chinese banks that are processing Iranian oil transactions, cutting off the last economic lifeline. At some point, the math becomes impossible even for the men with the guns. 3 scenarios are now on the table. In the first, the IRGC completes its coup, installs a hardline negotiator, and the blockade continues until the economy contracts another 15%, inflation crosses 100%, and the Iranian people return to the streets in numbers that dwarf 2022. In the second, the economic pressure becomes so unbearable that factions within the IRGC fracture. Junior commanders whose salaries have stopped arriving begin questioning Vahidi's leadership, and a face-saving framework is quietly assembled that reopens the strait and freezes the nuclear program in exchange for limited relief. In the third, and most dangerous scenario, the IRGC, recognizing that economic collapse is now unavoidable, makes one final desperate gamble, a strike on Gulf infrastructure, an attack on U.S. naval assets, or an accelerated push toward the nuclear threshold, forcing a confrontation that no one involved is fully prepared for. What is certain is this. The Islamic Republic of Iran, as it was constituted in 1979, is, in any functional sense, over. The clerical regime has been replaced by a military regime wearing clerical clothes. The constitution still assigns authority to the Supreme Leader. The operational reality assigns it to Ahmad Vahidi, a man on Interpol's list, running a nation of 92 million people, while his own president waits by a phone that never rings. The IRGC has spent decades building a state within a state. It has now eaten the state entirely, and every empire that has ever consumed itself in that kind of internal coup has faced the same two options at the end: reform or collapse. There is no third path in history. The only variable is the timeline, and in Iran's case, the timeline is being measured not in years but in days.